We're live.
Hi.
It's 1 o'clock.
It is 1 o'clock.
And it's Sunday.
On the dot.
We are on week 14, honey.
Wow.
How cool is that?
I think this is the first time we've been super consistent with Mormon marriages. Right?
What do you mean?
Just like...
just because we release podcast episodes so infrequently?
Well,
or inconsistently?
Yeah, because our podcast episodes are pretty inconsistent, just based on the fact that it's a hobby and it's not...
I'm liking this look today. We look good.
We do look good. I've got the camera in the way I can't see.
Yeah. You look cute.
Look good.
It's baby
Thanks.
kicking you.
She's just got her foot wedged in my side. And it's a little bit painful.
Well, if you're
it's
tuning...
either her foot or her bum. I'm not quite sure.
If you're tuning in live, leave a little comment and let us know you're here. We would really love that. And if you're tuning in as a recording...
Also leave a comment.
Yeah, let us know. We'd love to hear if there's anything in this conversation that resonates with you. So let us know and just say hi and who you are. And we read all of our comments, especially on the YouTubes and the Facebooks. So
yes,
it'd be great to hear from you. So today we're talking about something that came as a request from one of our regular listeners.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote us a couple weeks ago and said, hey, I'm a YSA, I'm single, and just kind of learning to process breakups. Like, dating is hard. You go through a lot of stuff. You put a lot of effort into these relationships and sometimes they don't work. How do you move on from that? And both Angilyn and I, when we were single, had gotten engaged and actually broken up with our fiancés at completely different times. And those breakups were really hard. And as we prepared for this lesson to talk about breakups specifically, we realized that if you're married, this also is relevant because a breakup is an ending. And there are all sorts of endings in life and in marriage that can disrupt your flow, disrupt your happiness, that can feel like a burden of grief and sorrow. I remember I interviewed a guy several years ago when I was doing the cross-country road trip, and his wife had brain surgery. And when the brain surgeons were in there operating, they nicked a part of her brain that affected her personality.
Oh, I remember hearing you tell me this story.
She came out of surgery a different person, and he's remained married to her, but he said he had to fall in love with a new person all over again. I watch people who are in their 50s and 60s who've spent a lot of their time and life raising children and finding a lot of value and worth in that. And then their kids move out and go to college or get careers or get married and they don't need mom and dad as much. And that's an ending.
I think we've got an ending coming up.
Yeah.
The ending of just being the two of us.
Yeah.
Like that in and of itself is an ending.
It's an ending.
As well.
Moving to like a new state where you don't know anybody can be really hard. Getting a new job and a transition like that, getting really sick, or losing a loved one. I've watched both of my parents lose. A lot of my grandparents have passed away in the last couple of years, and seeing the chapter, like when watching my mom and dad realize that their parents aren't around anymore, and the grieving and the mourning that happens with that. So there's all sorts of endings that you can experience in life. And if you don't know how to deal with those endings, whether it's the ending of a relationship or anything else, then the grief and the sadness and the despair and the sorrow you can carry that with you your entire life, and it can weigh you down, and it can impact your relationships, and then it can impact yourself and your emotional health and your ability to connect with other people. And so we thought we'd have a conversation today about how to deal with those endings in a really healthy and productive way so that you can set that burden down and move forward stronger and more resilient and more happy and more light and at peace than you have been in a while.
So while this conversation is going to be geared more towards breakups and of relationships, then I just lost my train of thought. Even though I was looking at the comments and my brain went away. It's okay. Even though this is going to be more geared towards breakups, these principles apply to everything. And also, even if you are married, if you haven't gotten over, or if you haven't allowed yourself to process through breakups, that just enters into your future relationships as baggage.
Yeah, you carry it with you.
You carry it with you, even if you don't realize that that's what you're doing. So these principles are really important for your relationship in general. So we're going to get started.
Cool.
First, let's talk about narratives around endings.
I guess I don't need to put that up there, do I?
Well, you can if you want.
You tell me which ones you
want. Narratives
to put up.
Around endings. So we'll talk about just general narratives and then ones that are specific to our culture as members of the church. But a lot of times, especially with breakups, one of the narratives that we often tell ourselves is that we failed, or that because something is ending, it's bad. And when we look at
or you're bad,
yeah, then another narrative is when a relationship ends, you think, well, what's wrong with me? What could I have done differently? Or is it because I don't look a certain way? Or is it because I'm annoying? Or is it because
am I not worthy?
I'm not good enough?
I not deserving of this blessing?
Were they out of my league? What's wrong with me?
Did I screw it up? Is there something fundamentally wrong about me? I know I felt that when I broke up with my ex-fiance. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had been friends for so long and we had dated for quite a while, and there were very few people on the planet that I knew better than her. And I don't know any single guy on the planet that had done as much preparation as I had for marriage. I read marriage books. I went to workshops. I hung out with therapists. I did that cross-country road trip and interviewed couples who were in love with each other. I'd interviewed John and Julie, like all these marriage experts, the top marriage experts on the planet. And here I was in the ideal situation, engaged to my best friend and somebody who I knew better than anybody else and loved dearly. And it didn't work. Mm-hmm. It wasn't working. And I was like, I must be broken, because everything else in the recipe seems to be adding up to this should work, and It isn't working.
Right.
So it must be me. I must be bad. I must be just a failure. There must be something wrong with me.
And I think it's really hard too, especially in our culture. The older you get, this is really an unfortunate thing, because everybody's life journey is so different, and it's going to look different for everyone. And not getting married in college or not getting married in your early 20s can sometimes be looked at as a failure, which is really
I didn't get married till I was 32, and I'm not going to have my first kid till I'm 36. Mm-hmm. And I know there's people out there listening who it might be longer for them, and people who it might be shorter. I'm not trying to play the comparison game. I'm just trying to say, when I left my mission, somebody bet me a dozen donuts
that you'd be the first
that I'd be the first one married out of my group that went home. And we had people who got married within a year or 2 years, and it took me over a decade. Mm-hmm. And I had that expectation that I was going to go home and it would just click and work, and it just didn't.
It was interesting, just going along with this narrative. So I went on my mission to Honduras after I'd already graduated from college. So, and this was when the age had already changed, that women could go when they were 19. It was right when it changed. And I was 22 and 23 on my mission, already had my career. I was already a nurse. And all the missionaries called me grandma. And I was only 22 or 23, and they called me grandma, because in the culture of our church, graduating from college and not being married for some reason was looked down upon. And so
I got called a menace to society a lot because of that Brigham Young quote.
And what were some of the judgments people had against you?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I think there was one point where my dad asked me if I was gay.
Oh my gosh.
I was like, no.
Yeah.
No, I'm not. Some people were like, are you too picky? Do you have unrealistic expectations? Every wedding I would go to, whether it was a friend or a family member, would be like, you're next, right? You're next. And all of those expectations and comments start to weigh on you after a while, and it can.
And that is one thing that can make breakups in our culture so difficult to deal with, because it's like, great, here's another year of my life or another 6 months of my life that I am not going to get back, and I'm only getting older.
And think about those narratives outside of the context of breakups too. Like, when are you going to have kids? Or, what are you going to do with this next chapter of your life?
Or you're changing your career choice again.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's a lot of narratives out there that can make you feel like you're a failure, there's something wrong with you, or
let's talk about, Nate talks about this concept all the time, is the fallacy of sunk costs. So this is when you've put so much effort into something and it's gone on for so long that you're like, how am I ever going to let this go? Because I've already put so much effort into it. This is what I experienced when I broke up with my fiance. So we had dated before my mission and even got engaged before my mission. And then he waited for me my entire mission. And then I got home from my mission and I was like, this isn't what I want anymore. But in my head, I had been like, this guy waited a whole 1.5 years for me. And now just months after I'm getting home, I'm realizing that this isn't what I want. But how can I do that to him after he put so much effort into waiting and we spent all this time imagining our future together in these two years or whatever. And so that almost kept me from ending the relationship, even though I knew it wasn't what I wanted, because
how scary is that?
It's so scary. But then I realized that I was unfairly continuing a relationship that I wasn't 100% invested in.
Yeah.
And that was ultimately when I became, and this is all in hindsight. And we'll talk about that later. But the narrative I had in the moment, which is another narrative that we deal with a lot, was, oh, this isn't what God wants for me.
Yeah.
I was blaming what I didn't want on God. I was using the excuse that the Spirit was telling me that this relationship wasn't right. And I do think that there is a place for that. I think there's place for spiritual revelation and when it comes to ending a relationship. And I felt like that was what was going on in my relationships. I was being spiritually guided to end things. But I blamed it on God didn't think it was right. When really I think God was telling me, Angilyn, is this really what you want?
Yeah.
Like, Angilyn, I think that you know that this isn't really what you want. And nudging me in that direction. But that's also a narrative we have to be really careful of, is just throwing our hands in the air and saying, if something doesn't work out, saying, oh,
right,
it just wasn't meant to be.
So all of these narratives that we just talked about they're not universally bad, but they are narratives that are very common that can hold you back from healing or from processing and whatever happens during an ending.
Right.
And so now we want to walk through 5 steps or 5 things that you can do to help you not just like throw your hands in the air and say, I'm broken, I'm a failure, or I guess it just wasn't meant to be. And just,
or God
just doesn't want me to have this right now.
The right one's out there for me somewhere. And when the time is right, it'll just happen. And
a lot of these phrases and these tropes that we use to kind of explain
or make ourselves feel better,
they aren't actually healing.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're going to walk through just 5 super simple steps, things that you can do to help yourself actually heal and process so that you don't carry the grief and the baggage from an ending or a breakup into your next relationship or your current relationship, the next phase of your current relationship. Right. One of my favorite quotes, I don't know if I put this on here. I think I mentioned it in the email that I sent out. One of my favorite quotes from Esther Perel, I'm going to paraphrase. She's a psychotherapist who specializes in working with couples. And she says, the average person has, 3, maybe 4 relationships in their life. Mm-hmm. And it's often up to you whether or not it's with the same person. And so I want you to remember,
including your marriage.
Yeah, your marriage. Really your marriage counts here. So most couples at some point in their relationship are going to go through a big enough transition that the old relationship has to die in order to make space for the new version of their relationship. Oftentimes that's when they have their first kid or their second kid, or when they become empty nesters, like a new phase of life begins, and you have to grieve and process the past relationship so that you can create space for the new one. So this can also apply not just to like us when we were engaged and broke up with our ex-fiancés, or if you're breaking up with a boyfriend or a girlfriend and you're listening, or you're going through a divorce. This also applies to if you're staying in the relationship, but entering a new phase of the relationship. Right.
So we're going to talk about 5 steps, really, but before we go there, let's talk about the comments.
You have an adorable baby bump.
Thanks.
I'd love to see you in a love seat together. I agree.
I know.
We'll work on it.
We also agree.
This is just what we have right now, but we'll see.
We agree.
Jenna went through that on her mission when she served at 24, 25. She can relate to being grandma.
Yeah, grandma.
That's just like me. I graduated college and went on a mission. 22. Yep, you're in there too, Quincy.
Yep.
Amen. Thank you. So glad you talk about this topic. It's a problem for sure.
Definitely exaggerated in our culture. Definitely.
Stephanie says, very true. Even in Latin America, people think it's normal for a girl to get married around 26 and a man has to be in his 30s.
Interesting.
While on my mission back in the States, a sister that attended to a marriage while we were at the visitor center told me, why are you here? You are 20. You should be married already. It was like, okay.
Again, these are all narratives that just contribute to the anguish behind a breakup. But yeah, so the first step when it comes to an ending, any ending.
You want to talk about this?
Is, oh yeah.
Or do you want to do this after?
Well, it's already up, so let's talk about it.
Okay.
So when it comes to endings, this is something that, is it Vienna Ferrone? Is that her name?
Yeah. Farron or Ferrone.
Nate interviewed a marriage and family therapist about breakups, and I was listening to it this morning, and she said this, and I thought it was really powerful, because a lot of times we tell ourselves, oh, we just need to give ourselves time. Time heals all wounds. But the truth is, time doesn't heal all wounds. It's time well spent that heals all wounds.
If that landed with you, hit the little like button.
Yeah. Time well spent heals all wounds. Yeah. And so if our time is spent in these unhealthy narratives, or we'll talk about some other unhealthy things, ways we can spend our time after a breakup, then time necessarily doesn't heal it. It might go into the background of our lives, but again, it will show up in our relationships as baggage in some way or another.
Just because time passes doesn't mean you're healing.
There are things you can do, time well spent, that will help you heal your wounds.
So what's the first step?
Give yourself permission to feel. So important. Feeling sometimes sucks.
Yeah. It's a temptation to like bury stuff or run away.
Sometimes feeling pain, feeling sadness, feeling grief, feeling scared when something ends is not fun. It isn't fun, but it is so important for getting over or moving through the ending.
Yeah.
And there are ways to do this, and there are also ways to not do this. So one of the things that we do sometimes in our lives to avoid this feeling is by pretending, oh, well, it's not that big of a deal. It's fine. We were only dating for a month, so it's not that big of a deal. You minimize it.
Or maybe you just have the narrative of like, I need to be strong and I need to be resilient, and so I can't show emotion.
Right.
Like, I can't be affected by this. Maybe you don't want to let other people see that you're hurting. Maybe a lot of men are like, I can't cry. I can't be sad. I'm just going to bury it and move forward.
Burying it is a good way to describe pretending like you weren't affected. And you're not just telling this to people around you. You're telling yourself this. You're saying, I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm not affected by this. And you're essentially lying to yourself.
Yeah.
And burying those emotions, and they will come out in some other way, whether it's
in not a healthy way.
So another thing that we do to avoid emotions is we try and numb them. And you see this a lot in society with people self-medicating with drugs and alcohol. But maybe more geared toward our culture, overeating, going to get that tub of ice cream, the
Ben and Jerry's,
or wasting hours and hours and hours and hours in front of Netflix, or playing video games, social media. You're doing these things to escape feeling the emotion. You're numbing it. And another thing that can happen with an unhealthy way of feeling emotions is called flooding. And that's when
you're so overwhelmed by the emotions that you're feeling that you can't even function.
Right.
So sometimes you let the emotions, this is the opposite of pretending you weren't affected. It's like letting it consume you and almost not being able to get out of bed in the morning,
right?
Or
literally
answer
not
your
getting
phone.
Out of bed in the morning.
It's like you can't go to work. You just become a puddle. I did this. I think it was 3 days after I broke up with my ex-fiance. I was in bed, literally just like staring at the ceiling for 3 days straight, until my dad walked in one day and said, "You need to move. Like, you need to get up." And I got really angry at him, but I was definitely
take a shower.
I was definitely in this spot where I was like, I can't imagine life without her. This is like, my life is over. I might as well just be dead. Like, you can get into a really negative, nasty place when you're in this position.
So again, there's a balance here.
So we're talking about things not to do. So if we go back to the principle of giving yourself permission to feel, what are some tips that can help you feel the emotion?
One thing that Vienna said that I thought was really helpful, and this is actually something that my therapist told me to do when I had a miscarriage, was to give myself a certain amount of time a day, like to schedule it, a certain amount of time a day where I just let the emotions in. Whatever those emotions were, whether I sobbed, whether I cried, whether I threw my pillows around my bedroom or screamed, like whatever I needed to do to feel that emotion, to give myself, let's say 20 minutes. And I would start my timer and I would just let loose whatever I needed to do. And then the good, the bad, the ugly. And then once that timer went off and that 20-minute was done, you blow your nose, you wash your face, and then you move on with your day. Yeah. And then tomorrow you do it again. So just give yourself that time to feel all the feels. Another way that you can do this is with meditating and journaling.
Yeah.
There was at one point on my mission where I had my emotion journal, where I would just open up. It was this big notebook, and I would open it up and I would just write. And it wasn't even coherent. Like, if I were to go back and read it, I probably wouldn't even be able to read the sentences. But just getting what was in my head out onto a piece of paper and just writing and writing and writing and writing and writing. That was one thing I also did to help myself feel the emotion in a healthy way. So yeah, journaling, meditating, and then giving yourself that time and avoiding the flooding by putting a time frame on it. And that can be super helpful.
Love that. Can I talk about this one?
So this goes, one part of allowing yourself to feel the emotions is because you're allowing yourself to process through it. And another thing that Vienna said in this podcast is that everything is happening for you, not to you. And this is a really healthy mindset to adapt. I mean, we read this in the Doctrine and Covenants when Joseph Smith was in Liberty Jail and he was saying, God, where are you? Why are we having to go through all these things? And ultimately, the answer that God had for him was, all these things will eventually be for your good, you know?
If you let them.
If you let them. And that's what this mentality helps you to adopt, is the things that are happening to me may be out of my control, but they're happening for me. They can ultimately be for my good. Even if it's like a horrible situation, there's things that you can learn from it that can help you be better in the long run. So this was something she recommended in the emotion stage, is trying to have this mantra of, this is happening for me. Right. This is going to teach me something. Letting life be your greatest teacher. What can I learn from this?
This reminds me.
It seems cliche, but it helps.
It's powerful.
Right.
Like I'm a big fan of Stoicism. Stoicism is an ancient philosophy that some of the most powerful and influential leaders in history have adhered to. And one of the basic principles of Stoicism is that you don't waste time and energy and emotion worrying or focusing on things that are outside your control. But what you can do is take the circumstances that you're given and make the best out of them and learn the lessons that you can from them. And there's a lesson in every single trial. There's a lesson in every single negative circumstance. And I know that the most negative and difficult things that I've gone through in my life, when I have allowed them to, have only helped to shape my character for the good. They've made me more compassionate. They've made me more patient. They've made me more self-aware. They've made me more in tune with other people's suffering. and they've helped me become a better version of myself.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you look at your trials and the struggles and the endings that you're going through, even if at the very bottom of the barrel you have to scrape down and say, this is going to make me a more compassionate and understanding person down the road, and if that's all I get out of this, it's worthwhile because it's happening for me and not to me. The other way around, you are a victim.
Mm-hmm.
And God didn't put you on this planet to be a victim. You're not here to be a victim of circumstance.
No, he says we're here to act, not be acted upon.
Right.
And that's exactly what this concept is saying.
Yeah.
And then this moves right along into the second step, which is to talk about it. This can be really hard for some people, I think, because they don't even know where to begin.
I think it's really important to start by identifying who you talk to.
Yes.
Because you don't talk about it to anybody.
Just anybody.
Not just anybody.
Right.
Like you don't call up any random friend or acquaintance or stranger or random person that you meet at the shopping market and dump your suffering on them. But it is important to have people in your corner that you can talk to.
Right.
That you trust and that love you and that care about you and that will hold space for you.
And another thing is to identify those people that aren't just going to give you lip service.
Yeah.
There are those people who I know whenever you share things like this, they're just like, oh, well, they didn't deserve you. Or
they find ways to dismiss it on your behalf instead of giving you the empathy.
Instead of giving the empathy that you need. You want to talk it out with somebody who's going to listen to you, who's going to want to help you kind of step out of yourself a little bit. That's the whole purpose of talking about it, is being able to look at things from an outsider's perspective and maybe identify your blind spots in the matter. And the more you talk about it and the more perspectives that you get from people who love you and who have your best interest in mind and who will advocate for you, the more you're able to find those lessons that we talked about with learning the emotions. The more you're able to be like, okay, this relationship really was abusive and it's a darn good thing that I got out of it. Yeah. But even though I don't necessarily think this person was good for me or who did horrible things to me, I now know what red flags to look like and what red flags to look for in the future with relationships. Totally. And now I can recognize those red flags if they come. So the more and more you talk about it, the more and more you're able to process it, the more you're able to find those lessons. And someone once told me each relationship you have is just one step forward, one step closer to the ultimate relationship.
Yeah.
And so
I want to reemphasize something that you said, just because I think it's important for people to hear. Talk about this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is okay to repeat the same story over and over and over and over again. Human beings are verbal processors. We process emotions and we develop meaning through stories. And if you need to tell your story over and over and over again for it to develop a sense of meaning and for you to come to an understanding of it, that is totally okay. So don't pick people who are okay hearing you like run through a scenario or a circumstance over and over and over again, and be okay with it and hold space for you.
Right.
You know?
And one thing that can be helpful in this situation too, not everyone will want to go see a therapist, but sometimes a therapist is a really good third party person that you can just feel zero guilt dumping everything on.
And they're trained to help you deal with stuff like this.
I had an experience once when we first got married. We just had a lot of things pile up all at once, where we were getting used to being married. We were moving into a new apartment.
I was starting a new job.
Then your sister got married.
Again.
I was starting school and a new role at work. Your grandma died. We had a big family, just so all these things piling on at once. And I just started having multiple panic attacks. And so what I did is through my work, they have the employee assistance program where you can go and talk to a counselor. And I remember just sitting on this guy's couch and just sobbing and just verbally vomiting. And I don't think he said a single thing the whole time. He nodded and he was like, yeah. Ooh, that sounds hard. The whole entire time. And for an hour, I just
And didn't at the end he say, have you thought about like maybe lightening your workload?
He did recommend going down to part-time, but it was just nice because I only had to go in once.
Yeah.
And just the act of getting all of it out was all I needed to get back to my
And having somebody
peace.
Validate, that is a lot.
Right.
No wonder you're having a hard time.
He was like, if anyone was dealing with one of these things, they would be overwhelmed. Yeah. And you're dealing with 5 of them at the same time. So it's just really nice to have someone who had no interest in my personal life. Like he had no investment in my personal life. He didn't really have any attachment to any outcome in my life. He was just this stranger. It was really helpful.
Yeah.
So that's one benefit of it. And another thing that I wanted to bring up is it's okay when you're talking it out and when you're letting yourself feel the emotions, if you're feeling contradicting emotions. I'm trying to think of the word to say. If you're feeling emotions that seem opposite from each other, it's okay.
Like missing somebody and hating them at the same time.
Right. It's okay to feel grief and sadness that it's over, and also relief that it's over.
Great example.
It's okay to miss someone and then also recognize that they weren't the right person for you. And I think when people are feeling these emotions, a lot of times I hear people say, I shouldn't be feeling this because I know that they're not right for me. And I know that it was not a good relationship. It's normal.
Yeah.
You can feel those contradicting things at the same time.
And part of the reason that you might feel those contradicting things is because of this. So step number 3 is do what you love, reclaim, and reframe. And the reason do what you love is important is when you are having an ending of your life, typically that means that the time and energy and attention that you were spending on one person or a group of people or activity or whatever is coming to an end. And all of a sudden you have this free time. All of a sudden you have an excess of mental energy or emotional energy that used to be spent on this time or activity or endeavor or person. And now it's not.
This can sometimes manifest itself as a little bit of an identity crisis.
Yeah.
Because you had this role as this person's partner.
And remember how at the beginning we talked about a lot of people numb their emotions through escape? This is one of the reasons they do that, is like, I have all this extra time now. And like, oh, I can't watch this TV show anymore because it's the TV show I used to watch with my ex. Mm-hmm. Or I'm not going to soccer games anymore because that's what I did when my kids were growing up every single Saturday. And now that they've moved out, we have our Saturdays completely open and it's not dominated by soccer anymore. So what do I do to fill the time? I mean, there's like 1,000 things that you could do.
And this goes back to time not healing your wounds, but time well spent healing your wounds. So there's going to be a difference between binge watching Netflix and then going on a hike if you love being outdoors.
Right.
So I like the phrase reclaim and reframe because this is when you're reclaiming your identity.
Like 2 weeks ago, we did a lesson about shame. And one of the ways to deal with shame that was part of her framework was reclaim and reframe.
Mm-hmm. And so what you're doing here is you're going back to those things that you love to do. Maybe you haven't been able to do it for a while, or you're whipping out your paints again. Maybe you haven't painted in a long time, or you're pulling out your instruments you haven't played for a while, or you're now spending time with friends that you haven't spent time with for so long because you've been so invested in this relationship, mm-hmm. or you're learning a new hobby, or
reading
going back
books.
To school if you want to go back to school. Yeah, read a good
Don't
book.
Just pass the time. Don't get sucked into time-wasting activities. Spend the time doing something meaningful and purposeful, and it will help. Not only will it help you grow, but the active process of creating and moving and reconnecting with people is healing.
Right.
All of those things release endorphins. They release pleasure chemicals. They are rewarding inherently in and of themselves. And so if you're spending your time creating like art or music, or you're starting a new website, or you're starting a new business, or you're reconnecting with friends, or making new friends, or you're getting out into nature, or you're picking up a new hobby, all of those things are going to contribute in a positive way to your mental, emotional, and spiritual health in a way that spending that time on your phone scrolling, or in front of pornography, or in front of like Netflix, spending hours and hours there they're not gonna help you to heal. It will mm-hmm. just be passing the time.
One thing I love, this comes from Laura Doyle, is she recommends making a list, two lists. One is a list of things that you love to do that just are kind of like your
guilty pleasures,
like getting a pedicure or manicure, or
they make you feel good while you're doing them.
And then she recommends making another list that is not necessarily things that you love doing, but things that once you're done, you say, I'm so glad I did that. They fill your tank. That could be cleaning your house. Some people probably love cleaning their house, but...
Well, we just redecorated our bedroom a little bit, and we didn't have a headboard, and Angilyn finally went out and found a bed that had a headboard, and we got some a new duvet that was beautiful and white, and I put it together this week, and we walked in, and it was a completely different room, and when it was clean and we had put some effort into it, it was like a breath of fresh air.
But in the moment when the room is a chaotic mess and you've got wood everywhere
and boxes,
and it can be stressful. But once you're done and you walk in and you're just like, oh, this gives you a breath of fresh air. It could be things like doing the dishes, or the next point, which is point number 4, is exercise. This is a big one.
Yeah.
And this is the one that is sometimes just really hard to start. When you're feeling grief, when you're feeling sad, when you're mourning, sometimes getting up and putting on your running shoes and going for a run is the last thing that you want to do.
So I watched a movie last week called Brittany Runs a Marathon, and I loved it. And if you haven't watched it, it's on Amazon, and it's pretty awesome show. And it's about this girl who was feeling depressed and sad and grieving a chapter of her life kind of either ending, or she's scared that it would never come to pass. And her neighbor invited her to run a marathon, and she's like, I haven't exercised in I don't know how long. But she starts on I'll never forget this, but the scene where she goes out to run for the first time, there's all this tension and pressure, and she stands at the door with her hand on the doorknob for 30 seconds, and you can tell she's just thinking, can I do this? Should I do this? And she walks outside, and she goes down to the corner and back, and then goes inside. And then the next day she goes a little bit further and then comes back. And then after a week, she goes around the block, and she's just gasping when she gets back. But she starts to make progress and gain a little bit of momentum. And there's a beautiful concept about momentum is that once you have it, it's easy to increase it. The hardest thing about creating momentum is that very first part of going from stagnant or not moving to moving. So the goal is, what is the smallest thing that you can do if you're in a place where exercise is hard for you? What's the smallest thing that you can do that will start to get you momentum? And then how can you continue to be consistent and build on that momentum?
Right. So let's talk about why exercise. So exercise it releases endorphins for one, and it releases those hormones in your body that are natural painkillers. And your body, your brain, it processes pain in the same place. So it processes emotional pain and physical pain in the same place. So your brain can't really differentiate between the two. And so when you're out exercising and you're releasing these endorphins, you're not only helping your physical pain, you're also helping the emotional pain. Definitely. So it gives those natural painkillers to the pain that you're feeling. Another thing that it does is it helps prevent the flooding of your emotions that we talked about earlier. Going out and doing a quick exercise, whatever it is that you love to do to exercise, it clears your mind.
Well, one of the things that it does is it forces you to breathe and oxygenate your blood. And when you breathe, your fight or flight mechanism tends to drop quite a bit. Yep. And so part of the reason that flooding occurs is you're just in a very heightened, hyper-aware state. Your adrenaline is pumping. You've got this cortisol that's getting released into your body. And it's just an overall really negative situation. But if you go out and change your physical state, then your physiology changes. And if you start taking some deep breaths and sweating a little bit, your body starts to take your high heart rate as this isn't a stressful situation, emotionally stressful, it's physical activity. And then it releases those endorphins and you're in a really great place.
So that's why a lot of times they recommend, before you have to make a really big decision, go exercise. Or
we talk about this. If you had to have a hard conversation with your partner, go for a walk together.
We go for walks together when we have difficult conversations that we need to have, because again, it decreases that fight or flight
So even if you're just going for a walk and that is your exercise, like get out and go for a walk.
Get moving in some way or another.
Let's talk about number 5.
And the last one is to surround yourself with people who love you. This is so important because a lot of times when there is an ending, especially an ending that's out of your control. If someone broke up with you, if you got let go from
any
a
type
job,
of ending, including like if somebody else dies,
losing
a job, going bankrupt, having your kids move out, moving to a new place, all of these things are endings,
right?
That can be really difficult to deal with.
And sometimes when you are in the thick of the emotions, it's easy to feel like, am I just unlovable, or is there just something wrong with me? But when you surround yourself with people who genuinely love you and genuinely care about you in these moments, it's going to be a little bit easier to get through.
For sure.
So let's review the 5 steps.
Okay.
First,
step number 1.
And these are all interchangeable. It's not like a process. It's just, these are things you can do. Number 1, make sure you're giving yourself permission to feel, and to feel all the feels
that you're not avoiding by pretending you weren't affected, numbing the emotions, or letting the emotions take you over. If you want to learn more about the difference between these, go watch last week's episode when we talked about the gateway to intimacy, because we talked about the balance between having no boundaries, being boundaryless, and having your emotions be like chaos and they spread to everybody else, and you being affected by everybody's emotions. And that's kind of like this flooding situation. And then on the other side, you have walled off, which is pretending you're not affected, pretending like you don't get to experience emotion. What we want to find is something in the middle. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be the most healthy. We talked about that in last week's episode.
You also want to talk it out as much as you can. It might be 10 times a day for the first week. And then the next week, maybe it's only 5 times a day. And then the next week, maybe it's just every other day.
And don't be afraid to repeat yourself over and over, and make sure that you're sharing with people who are in your corner and
verbally
willing to
process.
Listen.
Yep. And then again, stay busy. Fill your time with things that uplift you, that help you feel better, that just complete you and can help you fill that void or help you reclaim your identity that may be lost with the loss of a role that comes with an ending.
Yep. Exercise, get out, move your body in any way, shape, or form. It'll release endorphins. It'll help you heal, and it'll help you find yourself again.
And surround yourself with people who love you. And it's not a bad thing to ask them, can you tell me some of the things you love about me? Sometimes when I'm having a bad day or feeling a little low or feeling a lack of self-confidence, sometimes I'll say, Nate, can you just tell me a few things that you love about me?
And I'm always happy to oblige.
And that sometimes that's all you need. It's not like puffing yourself up. It's just reminding yourself that you do have worth. You do have value. Value that is not conditional based on whether or not you're in a relationship or whether or not you're married or whether or not you have this job.
Whether or not you have kids relying on you, whether or not, Anyway.
So when it comes to endings, we go back to the idea of there's opposition in all things. The contrast of the dark charcoal background can make the brilliance of the white diamond just shine even brighter. And so when you allow yourself to go through the grief and the pain of an ending, it just makes the joys of a new beginning or the joys of a successful relationship or of a marriage that much more sweeter.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's just ingrained in the doctrine that we believe in as members of the church.
And I think there's a lesson even underneath that, which is there are some people who live their lives so afraid of endings and disappointments that they never take risks.
Right.
And I think it's important to know that not only is it possible to recover and heal from these endings and these disappointments and these sad times in our lives, but it's necessary. There's lessons embedded in there, and you don't get the lessons if you're not willing to take the risk. And not only that, you don't get to experience the joy that comes along with them. Like, there is sadness in, I've watched my parents go through it. There's sadness in watching your kids grow up and move out of the house and not depend on you for everything anymore. But if you don't ever take the risk of having kids and knowing that sadness will eventually one day come, you miss out on all the joys that happen in raising those children. You know, there's sadness in breaking up with somebody that you love. You might love them a lot and have amazing cherished memories with them, but if you never take the risk to love again, then you never get to experience the depth and meaning and significance of connecting with another human soul in a way that you couldn't connect with otherwise.
I want to speak to that. Okay. Because I feel like this was something that I did for years. And this even almost kept me from marrying Nate, was the fear of endings. I was so afraid of the end of the breakup that I would sabotage relationships before they even began.
You tried to do that with me.
And so I really want to speak to those, maybe especially those who are single or YSA, who may be looking for relationships or in the process of finding relationships. I think that fear is very real.
Especially if you've been through quite a few.
Yeah. And this especially was after the pain of several.
You start to kind of lose hope.
But then I remember with Nate, when we started going on dates and I started having a lot of fun with him and I started thinking that there could be potential here, I immediately put up walls and tried to kind of push him away. And I remember he asked me why one day, and I said, because I don't want to hurt you. I'm afraid. I had felt so bad about the ending with my ex-fiance. I never wanted to hurt anybody like that ever again. And so I subconsciously just kept people at a distance because I didn't want to be that person that hurt somebody. And taking the risk of letting Nate in completely with the chance that maybe it would end someday was one of the scariest things I'd ever done up to that point. But taking the risk was so worth it because, again, I was this close to letting Nate go. And that thought just makes me sick sometimes at how close I was to letting Nate go because of that fear. So don't let the fear of a painful ending keep you from taking those risks and giving it a try, because you never know what could come out of it. Even if it is an ending, you'll at least learn something from it. So.
What a great way to end.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, everyone. We hope that you got something out of this lesson.
Yep. And whether you're dealing with an ending of a relationship or a friendship or maybe a family relationship, or maybe it's just a life circumstance, just know that you're not alone. We all deal with endings in our life. And I hope that these 5 points, these 5 steps or principles will help you to process that grief and the sadness that you feel and move forward happier without that weight and burden on your shoulders anymore, instead of just carrying it with you throughout the rest of your life. I see so many people just carrying the weight of their endings with them throughout their life. And it's just such a sad way to live, carrying an unnecessary burden. And I hope that this will help you along your path.
And just remember what Elder Uchtdorf says. There's no such thing as endings. Just remember that when things end, it's just always a new beginning. When one thing ends, something is always beginning, and that has a lot of hope in it. Yeah. So.
Well, we will hang around, as we always do, for a couple of minutes and answer questions. And just as a reminder, feel free to tag friends or family members that you think might benefit from this in the comments, or just share the link with them. And we are always looking for and interested in hearing what you guys would like us to talk about. This was one of those conversations that came about as a result of one of our listeners saying, hey, can you talk about this? And I'm really glad we did. This is a really useful conversation. So if you have thoughts, or you're dealing with something in your life or in your relationships right now, and you're like, I could use a little bit of guidance, hit us up and we will prepare a lesson and do our best to give you some pointers of how to deal with this.
And we love it too, because then we learn from it as well.
Like, we're selfish that way.
Like listening to the podcast this morning was super helpful for me.
Good.
But we'll hang out for a little bit if you guys have any questions, like we always do.
Stephanie, thanks for tuning in.
Yeah.
We love having you here every week. Are you in Ecuador, Bolivia? I forget. But thanks for tuning in.
Yes, thank you.
I'm going to turn off this banner. I'm hungry. Are you hungry?
I am hungry.
All I've eaten is nachos today. And a Diet Dr. Pepper.
When I was little, whenever me and my family got back from church, every single Sunday we would make nachos with a hint of lime tortilla chips. And this morning I was like, what do I want to eat for breakfast?
Nachos.
And Nate had bought some tortilla chips and I was like,
they were reminding me of my too.
They are good tortilla chips. This is reminding me of Ecuador. Yes, I remember now. Thanks. All right.
I don't see any questions coming in.
I don't either.
There's always a slight lag between when we talk and when they can hear us.
I think it's like a 30-second lag.
Yeah. So I like to hang around for a little bit.
Yeah, I don't mind.
What do you got going on this week that you're excited about?
I have some baby showers this week.
You're going to get showered with babies?
They're social distancing baby showers. They're like drive-by showers where they're going to be outside in the backyards so we can spread out a little bit more.
So you're so awesome.
And then we all put on the invitations that there's going to be drive-up options where people can just drive up if they're not comfortable being around other people or they don't want to worry about like a mask or anything. They can just honk their horn and we can go say hi. And
Jacob, any word about your exciting announcement? I'll send you an email tomorrow. I've been working on a project for a while and I haven't told anybody in the Mormon Marriages community about it, but I think it will be really cool for a lot of you. So I promise I will send you an email tomorrow morning.
It is fun. It is exciting.
It's very exciting.
All right, everybody. We sure love you. Thanks for tuning in.
We'll talk to you next week.
We're
going to do this until...
Well... Once baby comes, it might be a little bit harder, but we'll definitely
so we're about 5 weeks out.
We'll reevaluate. Yeah, we're about 5 weeks out.
So we'll try and make it all the way to maybe 19 or 20. Okay. Talk to you guys next week.
See ya.
Bye.